Hey everybody, it's Eric from epautos.com, your libertarian car guy. As you can probably tell if you're a car guy, you're looking at the just updated 25 Infiniti QX80, and wanted to show you a couple of things. First, the new nose, which I think is a big improvement over the nose that the QX used to have previously, which I personally considered to be its greatest liability because it kind of looked like the Guild Navigator from the 1984 version of Dune, if you're familiar with that particular movie. It just wasn't the most attractive face, in my opinion. I think they've done a very nice job with the restyling here. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you, there's an equally significant change. Bear with me, it's just me, your libertarian car guy. I don't have an assistant to help me with the camera stuff, so I'm gonna pop the hood here and show you the other thing. It's in keeping with the trend. You can probably anticipate where I'm going. Hang on, got it. Okay. As you can see, there's no longer a 5.6 liter V8 under the hood of the QX. Instead, there's a twin turbo V6. Lots of things about this that are interesting. The first is, of course, that it's about half the size of the previous engine, but makes more power, 450 horsepower versus 400 previously. On the other hand, it's a twin turbocharged engine and a smaller engine, and it's going to need the boost probably to move the big old Q. But I think the most fascinating thing about this, and I touched on it in a prior video, is that there's hardly any gas mileage difference. The old V8 version got 14 city and 20 on the highway. This says 16 and 20, so a negligible difference. And you know, you hear a lot of talk about, oh, you know, these small engines are so much more efficient. They're, oh, we're going to save so much money on gas. It's not about that. It's about regulatory compliance. And not even so much about gas mileage, though that is a factor, because all of the car companies, including Infiniti, have to deal with CAFE, corporate average fuel economy requirements. And you might think, well, 2 miles per gallon, what's the difference either way? It's not on an individual level, but you know, if you're talking about fleet averages, which is what we're talking about, you know, let's say Infiniti sells 50,000 of these things in a year, then that actually starts to scale up and become an issue for them in terms of complying with the federal CAFE standard, which is currently 35.5 miles per gallon. Obviously, this thing will drag down Nissan's and Infiniti's overall corporate average. So, you know, that 2 mile per gallon difference does make a difference in that respect. But the other thing is a lot more subtle, and a lot of people have no idea that it's going on. And it has to do with the emissions, and I'm putting that in air fingers quotes, of the dread gas carbon dioxide. And I make fun of it because it's got nothing to do with pollution. And as I mentioned in my last video on this subject, whatever you think about the climate change thing, and whether you believe that carbon dioxide produced by the burning of gasoline and combustion-powered engines is causing that to happen, it isn't a pollution issue. You know, pollution has to do with things like smog, air quality, you know, whether your eyes water when you're in the vicinity of the tailpipe of one of these cars. And of course, the emissions that are coming out of these vehicles in that sense are essentially nil at this point, and have been so for many decades now. It's something else that people don't know. However, there's still the issue of regulatory compliance cost with the whole greenhouse gas thing. And that's why you're seeing these smaller turbocharged engines replace the larger engines that didn't need turbos. Because, you know, at least in an absolute ideal type scenario, a 3.5 liter V6 moves less air than a 5.6 liter V8, at least when it's not under boost. You see where I'm headed with this? So, you know, at low load type of situations, the CO2 output of this engine is going to be considerably less than that of the 5.6 V8, which is just got bigger, you know, it's got larger volume, more cylinder volume, it's got more cylinders, and so on and so on. And so that's why all of this is happening. You know, it's a compliance cost, in other words, and there is literally a cost to it. Now, granted, you know, Infiniti just updated this vehicle, so it is all new. It has a lot of other new features. You do get 50 more horsepower, but it's also $8,000 more expensive than it was previously. And part of that has to do with the greater expense, you know, of this twin turbo V6, which is a much more elaborate piece of equipment than a 5.6 liter V8. And I wanted to go back for just a minute too to this business of characterizing CO2 as an emission. I think it's very disingenuous because it's manipulative. You know, when people hear that word, the average person who isn't a gearhead, isn't somebody who understands how the regulatory regime at the EPA works, when they hear that word emission, well, they think of things that cause pollution, that make your eyes water, that make smog form. Carbon dioxide doesn't do that, so it's a sleight of hand. You know, I wish they would be more honest about it and just say, look, you know, we're having to impose these compliance costs because we believe the climate is changing and CO2 is causing it, blah, blah, blah. Instead of trying to manipulate people and tell them, oh, we're reducing emissions, when effectively that's not what's at issue. Anyway, just wanted to talk about that a little bit. I'll have more about the new Q over at epautos.com, the web's best libertarian gearhead site. I hope you will stop by, and if you like what you find there, please tell your friends and other people about it, and spread the word. Thanks, and we'll catch up with you again soon.